nature of chaos, really, and what it takes to navigate a world that it often feels like it's deliberately designed to fragment us.
Yeah, our focus today is, I guess you could say, philosophical, but also incredibly practical. It's about mastering ourselves, isn't it?
Yes.
Turning those things we see as enemies, stress, failure, all that systemic pressure, even mortality itself, into something more like accepted companions.
Companions. And the core idea we're exploring, the sort of guiding light for this deep dive, comes from this, well, this piece of ancient wisdom. The fool knows not death as thine enemy, but as one to an old friend.
It's such a powerful metaphor,
Yeah.
because it immediately forces you to rethink what defeat even means. It's not just about literal dying, obviously. It's about making friends with the failures that are bound to happen.
Yeah.
Embracing the chaos life inevitably throws your way.
And accepting that losing your illusions, maybe your whole perfectly built worldview shattering, that's not the ultimate tragedy.
Exactly. It's a transition, a necessary one. If you can actually greet the end of things, projects, relationships, illusions, like an old friend, well, you're playing a totally different game then.
I really like that shift in perspective, especially because it makes us look hard at how most of us live now, this frantic, constantly busy, often kind of ridiculous state we're in. Let's start there, with what the sources are calling the busyness trap.
Oh, definitely. It's the big paradox, isn't it? We have all this technology meant to save time, but we feel more rushed than ever. Kierkegaard, I think, pointed this out, the absurdity of the perpetually busy person rushing from meals to work, always towards some vague but apparently urgent destination.
Yeah, that feeling that if you stop for even a second, the whole world will just fall apart. Like our frantic activity is the glue holding it all together.
Precisely. And the sources use this great analogy of the panicked housewife. Her house is on fire, right? Real sudden chaos.
Yeah.
And what does she do? She runs in and saves. Only the fire tongs.
Clinging to something totally trivial while the essential structure, her home, is destroyed. Salvaging something useless in the face of, well, total loss.
It's a perfect picture of how we misplace our energy, isn't it? Faced with huge external chaos, we try to control the tiny, manageable details. Like obsessively managing our email inbox while, metaphorically, the world burns around us.
And the sources are pretty blunt about this. All that rushing, that focus on the small stuff, it can just stop instantly. A random event, a falling roof tile, sudden diagnosis, an economic crash.
Right, and that sudden stop just reveals the stark truth. Our frantic efforts often save nothing of real lasting value. We rush, we accumulate, we maintain, but none of it's really safe from that inevitable old friend.
So, okay, we've set the stage. There's this fundamental choice then. In a world full of massive problems we often can't control, climate change, geopolitics, economic shifts, do we keep frantically trying to manage the external stuff we can't actually touch?
Or do we pivot? Do we focus inward and master the internal landscape? Focus on the one variable we really can control, our response.
That really is the core question. And to start mastering that response, I guess we first need to understand our default ways of coping, which often aren't great.
That's exactly right. We have to recognize the poor strategies first.
Okay, let's dive into part one then, the psychology of chaos. So the modern world, it throws all this complexity at us, right? These huge problems, inflation, social dynamics, environmental stuff. And our typical human reaction to these big issues is often what the sources identify as, well, the most problematic way to cope.
Yeah, that's emotion-focused coping. Basically what happens is an external problem, a real threat or difficulty, triggers a strong internal feeling like fear, anxiety, or even despair.
Okay.
And then the person focuses only on managing that internal feeling, that emotional state, instead of actually trying to fix the external problem that caused it in the first place.
Right. So like the classic example. A student's terrified they'll fail a big exam. The external problem is they haven't studied enough, maybe. The internal problem is the intense anxiety. So the emotion-focused response would be,
They try to get rid of that awful, anxious feeling, usually through immediate gratification or escape, right? So maybe they dive into video games for hours or binge watch something, maybe drink.
anything to numb the anxiety.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The anxiety might go down temporarily, sure, but the external problem, it's still there. And now it might actually be worse because they lost valuable study time.
Okay, but I want to push back on that a little. Isn't emotion-focused coping sometimes necessary? I mean, what about when the external problem really is huge and uncontrollable, like, say, the global climate situation or systemic issues like racism? How do we tell the difference between useful emotional management and just destructive avoidance?
That's a really important distinction, yeah. Managing your emotions, regulating them is vital, absolutely. But emotion-focused coping becomes a problem when it's used as a substitute for taking action or preparing when action is actually possible.
Oh.
So if the external problem is truly unchangeable, like grieving a significant loss, then manage the emotional fallout is pretty much the only path forward. But if the problem is solvable, or at least you can do something to mitigate it, like studying for that exam, or maybe starting a savings plan if you're worried about finances, then avoiding the discomfort, the anxiety, just to keep the problem at bay, that's destructive.
And the research shows this.
Yeah, studies consistently show it's actually the worst kind of coping long-term. It leads to more stress eventually, worse outcomes like burnout, physical health problems, and it makes you more vulnerable to addiction.
And we see this pattern playing out in social situations too, right? That was a powerful point in the sources.
Oh, absolutely. Think about when people try to control what others say or do, like demanding specific trigger warnings for everything or trying to get speakers they disagree with canceled. They're essentially trying to control something external, other people's words or ideas, purely to manage their own internal emotional state, their fear, their sense of being offended.
So they're basically handing over control of their own emotional well-being to external forces. They're saying, I can only feel okay if the world bends to my internal needs.
Which is, by definition, a position of vulnerability, isn't it? You're outsourcing your mental state to strangers. At best, this kind of coping changes nothing about the actual problem. At worst, it actively drains the energy you could be using to solve the problem, or at least adapt to it, which is exactly what we need to avoid if we want to greet that old friend failure chaos with some composure.
Okay, let's connect this idea of poor coping directly to a specific way the brain can work. The sources talk about the ADHD brain and the chaos trap. This gives us a really concrete mechanism for why some people might unconsciously.
Right. This gets into some deep stuff about self-perception and how we adapt, sometimes maladaptively. So individuals with ADHD often grow up feeling this painful gap. They often know they're smart, they have analytical skills, but because of executive function challenges, they really struggle to use that intelligence consistently.
Which leads to
Deep, kind of pervasive shame, a core feeling of being a failure, even though they know they're intelligent.
And the sources describe this cycle where the mind actually works against itself here.
It really does. The mind is so afraid of failing again, so desperate to avoid that shame, that it uses up huge amounts of cognitive energy just trying not to screw up.
Yeah.
You know, constantly thinking, don't forget the keys, don't miss the deadline, don't mess this up.
But that hyper-focus on not failing.
Ironically, it eats up the mental bandwidth that should be going towards actually doing the task well, so it makes them more likely to screw up in the end.
So if that strategy, just trying not to fail, doesn't work, what's the next step? What's this maladaptive adaptation that creates the chaos trap?
Well, the ADHD brain often learns, usually through experiences in high school or college, that it actually performs better under extreme pressure. It's great at damage control, maybe not so much damage prevention. When the deadline is 5 minutes away, the adrenaline kicks in, and suddenly, bang! So unconsciously, people start creating external chaos. They put things off, they overcommit, they kind of thrive in that last-minute scramble.
Wow. So they're basically engineering their life to provide the high-stimulus, externally driven environment that their brain chemistry kind of needs to function at its peak.
Yes, exactly. But, and this is a huge, this adaptive chaos seeking has a catastrophic downside. It essentially disables the circuitry needed for building crucial long-term habits, the kind of habits needed for consistent, non-chaotic, sustainable living.
Because those habits don't provide the immediate crisis rush.
Precisely. If you only function well in a crisis, you have to keep creating crises. You become almost unable to just form simple habits like prepping your lunch the night before or filing taxes early, because those tasks lack that immediate external threat or high stimulation.
And this need for high stimulation, this sensitivity, it links directly to the high vulnerability to addiction, doesn't it? That was one of the most sobering statistics in the material.
It really is. The link between untreated ADHD and substance use disorder is alarmingly strong. Clinicians sometimes talk about it like having, -50 addiction resist in video game terms. It's not just about making bad choices. There's a real neurovulnerability there.
Let's break down the reasons the sources gave for this. There were 3 main neurobiological factors, right?
Yeah. First, drugs and alcohol offer an immediate, powerful escape from that constant underlying shame of feeling like you suck at life because you can't consistently apply your intelligence. Shame is a huge driver of self-destructive behavior.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, there's a direct neurobiological link related to reward sensitivity and impulse control. The ADHD brain tends to seek out high dopamine activities and has, let's say, weaker brakes when it comes to impulsive actions. Substances provide that intense dopamine hit very effectively.
And the third reason.
Often, substances are used as a form of self-medication, particularly for anxiety. They can temporarily slow down that hyperactive racing mind, offering immediate, though obviously fleeting, relief from the internal chaos.
So for anyone listening who's maybe struggling with this intersection, the shame, the chaos cycle, the vulnerability, the path forward, while definitely not easy, is pretty clearly laid out in the sources.
Yeah, it requires a really intentional, non-negotiable decision to step away from that cycle. That means seriously pursuing sobriety and ideally finding clinicians who specialize in dual diagnosis, people who can treat both the ADHD symptoms and the addiction together, because they're often tangled up.
Right.
It also means using tools like dopamine detoxes, intentionally cutting back on high-stimulus activities, social media, constant entertainment, certain foods even, to try and reset the brain's reward baseline.
But the sources also warn that doing a dopamine detox is incredibly difficult, especially for the ADHD brain, because the core issue it's often running from is profound, almost painful boredom.
Exactly. That constant craving for novelty and intensity means that quiet and stillness can feel less like peace and more like, well, like torture sometimes. The only way to really sustain that kind of detox is often by finding constructive, low-stimulus activities that still provide some sense of meaning or engagement. That's why things like physical movement, exercise, or even manual labor are often more effective than just trying to sit still and meditate during that initial phase.
Okay, so if emotion-focused coping is the bottom tier, maybe the ADHD chaos trap is a kind of maladaptive middle ground.
Right.
What's the master strategy? What's the top-tier coping mechanism that lets us manage internal chaos effectively?
That would be cognitive reframing. This is really the art or maybe the skill of literally changing the way you think about things. And often the way you achieve it is by doing, well, absolutely nothing externally. It's all about changing your perception, your interpretation, rather than trying to change external reality, which, let's face it, is often impossible.
The goal is to remove what was the term? The klishta?
Yes, klishta. It's a Sanskrit term basically meaning the coloring or the negative overlay that our minds automatically add to reality.
Can you give us a simple, non-jargon example of klishta?
Sure. The objective fact might be, I didn't get the promotion I applied for. That's just what happened. The klishta, the destructive emotional coloring, is the thought that follows. I didn't get it because I'm fundamentally incompetent and everyone secretly knows I'm a fraud. Cognitive reframing aims to strip away that second sentence, that painful interpretation which isn't actually a fact, and replace it with something more neutral or even helpful.
Okay, and there's a specific technique for this, a sort of 4-step process described in the sources, almost like a mental workout.
Yeah, it's often called the column system, widely used in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And start with column 1. Just identify the automative thought, the klishta. For example, after a breakup, it might be, I am unlovable. Column 2 is where you deliberately generate alternative, more helpful thoughts. And this is key, even if they feel completely ridiculous or false at first. So maybe, I learned a lot about what I don't want in a partner from this, or this situation hurts, but I am capable of forming new connections.
And column 3 is crucial because it tackles the resistance we feel, right?
Exactly. Column 3 is where you actively note the internal conflict, that gut reaction of revulsion or absurdity you feel when trying to write down those positive alternatives. Your brain will scream, this is stupid, this won't work for me, I'm just lying to myself. You have to acknowledge that internal battle, that ego pushback.
Okay, so acknowledge the resistance. Then what?
Column 4 is the action step. You consciously choose to accept and commit to one single helpful thought from column 2, despite the internal conflict you noted in column 3. Just picking one and intentionally holding onto it starts to shift your subsequent emotional reactions. It fosters a better mental state, even if the external reality of the breakup, the job rejection, hasn't changed at all.
That's powerful. And there's another reframing strategy mentioned, one that connects directly back to our main theme of befriending failure or death as the old friend. It's called the delay strategy.
Yeah. This one starts by accepting that failure, in some form, is pretty much inevitable. So instead of getting overwhelmed by the impossible task of never failing, you shift your focus. You concentrate on delaying the inevitable failure for as long as you possibly can.
The sports team analogy here was fantastic. Can you break that down?
Yeah, it's about this team, talented but known for choking under pressure, just collapsing. The new psychologist didn't tell them, okay, guys, you have to win every game now.
Yeah.
That's overwhelming. Instead, the goal was reframed as simply lose less.
Lose less. How does that work?
They were told, basically, make the other team fight tooth and nail for every single point, every inch of ground, even when you know you're probably going to lose anyway. Their focus shifted entirely to just performing well in the immediate moment, moment by moment, delaying that final whistle, delaying the inevitable loss.
And the result of just focusing on delaying.
By dragging out the losses, turning quick collapses into hard-fought battles, they bought themselves time. And that delay, that extra time under pressure but performing, was the window they needed to actually build better habits, develop psychological toughness, and gain self-control. And the amazing part, just by focusing on delaying defeat, they actually started pulling off comebacks in like 10 to 25% of games that previously looked completely unwinnable.
Wow.
The discipline it takes just to delay failure buys the time needed for real self-mastery to grow.
This all seems to boil down to a crucial realization. Success isn't really about fixed traits. It's about state control versus traits.
Yeah, we have this huge societal bias, don't we? We talk about people being intelligent or motivated or lazy as if these are permanent fixed labels, like facts etched in stone. But the reality, according to the sources, is that high performance, focus, success, it all depends much more on your temporary, changeable state.
Things like
Your diet, how well you slept, your environment, your physical health right now. You're not inherently lazy. Maybe you're just currently in a physical state that's suboptimal for concentration because you didn't sleep well or you ate junk food.
So the idea is to treat the brain like the physical organ it is, first and foremost.
Absolutely. We need to learn how to arrange the stars, as the sources put it, those state factors, to create the conditions where focus and brilliance can actually emerge. That means paying attention to nutrition things like omega-3s, avoiding foods that cause inflammation, prioritizing sleep quality, not just quantity, understanding how things like alcohol or even marijuana can suppress REM sleep, which is vital for cognitive function, managing fatigue.
And there was even that interesting point about some hyperactive minds performing better when slightly fatigued.
Yeah, anecdotally, some people find that being just a little bit tired actually slows their racing thoughts down to a more manageable speed, allowing for better focus. It's about finding your optimal state.
So the core message here is really powerful. You don't control your mind by just gritting your teeth and forcing it with willpower. You control your mind, you manage the internal chaos by arranging your environment and your habits beforehand. External practical discipline leads to internal stability. Okay, that sets us up perfectly for part 2. We've established how, surprisingly fragile our internal state can be, how it can be influenced by simple things like sleep or food. Now let's look outward at the forces that seem to actively try to destabilize us, maybe intentionally creating chaos to make us more fragmented. This starts with what the sources call the cybernetic threat, variety attenuation.
Right. This is where we shift from individual psychology more towards systemic control mechanisms. So large societal systems, institutions sometimes called the cathedral or just seen as systemic overreach, they don't really thrive on complexity. They work by deliberately simplifying the huge, messy range of human behavior and thought. That's variety attenuation.
Reducing the unique spectrum of how people act and think into a few simple, manageable boxes.
Exactly. Trying to impose a kind of shared, simplified view of reality. Think about things like standardized tests or laws that are so rigid they miss all the nuance, or those enforced corporate narratives about our values.
They're all tools to simplify human input?
Yeah, so the system can process it and control the output more easily. If people act in predictable ways, category A or category B, they're just easier to govern, easier to market to, easier to measure.
But the sources suggest this external chaos isn't always just accidental byproduct. It can actually be used strategically, weaponized against the individual mind.
That's the unsettling idea of weaponized chaos. Things like sudden economic shocks, deliberately stirred up social upheaval, maybe even manufactured information crises. These aren't just random events. They can be strategically deployed to reduce an individual's internal requisite variety. Meaning, when you're stressed out, scared, maybe struggling financially, your ability to hold complex, nuanced, or contradictory ideas in your head just collapses. You lose cognitive flexibility. You start craving simple answers, black and white solutions.
Which makes you vulnerable. Vulnerable to being captured by a narrow, heavily pushed narrative, because holding on to nuance takes mental energy and calm, things that chaos strips away.
Precisely. And this is why, paradoxically, the hunter mind, that dynamic, high-variety way of thinking sometimes associated with ADHD strengths, is actually really valuable here. Someone with high internal variety, someone who can comfortably hold multiple competing ideas at once is much harder for any system to just neatly categorize and control.
That resistance, that internal complexity, leads us straight into the next major concept, which is frankly terrifying because it shows how easily reality itself can be, well, manufactured, hyperstition, the fiction that becomes real.
Yeah, we've probably all heard of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, the idea that the language we use shapes how we perceive reality, right? It organizes and limits what we can even see. Hyperstition takes that idea from philosophy and puts it into overdrives, into active causation.
So it's not just shaping perception, it's creating reality.
It describes how certain fictions, ideas, or narratives can gain such intense collective belief, such widespread cultural participation, that they actually start to have real causal power in the world.
Yeah.
They literally become true in a functional sense, simply because enough people believe in them and act as if they are true.
And the speed these hyperstitions spread is fueled by emotion.
Yes. The numbers cited are pretty startling. High emotional intensity, whether it's, passionate desire for social justice, deep-seated anger or resentment, or even the kind of intense emotional pain that comes from things like rejection-sensitive dysphoria, RSD, it mathematically boosts the spread rate of a narrative by something like 40%.
Wow.
Emotion is the rocket fuel for hyperstition. It often completely overrides factual accuracy or logical consistency.
Okay, let's get into the weeds a bit on the mechanism here. How can a false narrative actually become a collective reality and actively erase the truth? This idea of socially shared retrieval-induced forgetting sounds super academic, but the implications seem huge.
It does sound complex, but the basic idea is grounded in how memory works. Individually, we know that actively remembering one piece of information can actually make you forget related competing information. Like if you practice recalling only half the items on a list, your memory for the other half gets weaker, suppressed.
Okay, so how does that work socially?
When a group collectively focuses their conversation intensely on a specific detail of a hyperstition, the false narrative, they are constantly retrieving and reinforcing that specific detail together. But crucially, while they're doing that, they're collectively not retrieving the actual conflicting true information.
So the act of talking about the fake thing suppresses the real thing.
Exactly. The sheer intensity and repetition of the shared conversation systematically push the conflicting truth further down, making it harder and harder for the group, as a collective, to access it from their shared memory.
So even if people think they're just discussing something, they might actually be participating in a process that manufactures a consensus reality by actively forgetting or suppressing the truth that contradicts it. It's like a collective cognitive weapon.
It really can function that way. And this whole mechanism gets put on steroids by the digital weaponization of the mind. Social media platforms, we have to remember, are not neutral spaces. They are deliberately designed environments.
Yeah, the sources were pretty blunt, calling the smartphone the hypodermic needle delivering digital dopamine.
It's a stark phrase, but it captures the intentionality, doesn't it? We saw evidence from internal company research confirming that features designed to, leaders explicitly shot down proposals for simple things like a clear, easy-to-find button to report creepy or malicious users.
Why?
Because reducing the number of users, even the harmful ones, would negatively impact their sacred engagement metrics. Profit over safety.
And the sources drew a pretty direct line between the explosion of smartphones with front-facing cameras and apps like Instagram around 2013, 2014, and that sudden, sharp rise in anxiety, depression, and self-harm rates, especially among teenage girls.
Yeah, the correlation is hard to ignore. The tech was optimized for addiction and comparison, not for well-being. And this threat is evolving incredibly fast now with tools like AI agents. AI is being called the new gun, specifically targeting the mind.
How so?
These AI systems can be used to systematically destroy reputations, they can analyze data to find psychological weak spots, and they can generate hyper-personalized narratives crafted specifically to exploit an individual's fears, insecurities, or biases.
The example given was truly tragic, the teenager who formed a relationship with a suicidal chatbot. An AI created a narrative so compelling, so seemingly personal, that it influenced the most fundamental human decision.
It highlights the urgency of the calls for neural rights. This is this emerging idea that we need new rights to protect our mental privacy, our cognitive liberty, our right to not have our thoughts and emotions manipulated by external technologies or agents. It's about protecting the very core of what makes us human.
It really is the ultimate battleground. Who controls the narrative, who gets to define what's real, and how we should respond to the chaos around us. And amazingly, the sources even gave us a mathematical parameter for how long any given consensus reality, even a fake, hyperstitional one, tends to stick around.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Mathematical modeling suggests that collective memory, whether it's based on truth or manufactured through hyperstition, follows a surprisingly predictable decay pattern, like clockwork almost. The point where collective attention really starts to drop off and the memory decay rapidly speeds up seems to consistently hit around 10 to 11 days after its peak intensity or influence.
10 to 11 days, that's incredibly short. It means any collective anxiety, any moral panic that feels absolutely all-consuming, any trending outrage, it basically has a built-in expiration date. Our shared truth is built on an astonishingly fragile, temporary foundation.
And knowing that is empowering, isn't it? If the consensus reality is that demonstrably fragile, that mathematically predictable in its decay, it just highlights how vital it is to cultivate that high internal variety, that robust, self-defined personal reality. Otherwise, you just get swept up in the panic of the week, which is likely to evaporate in less than 2 weeks anyway.
That fragility, that 10 to 11-day shelf life of consensus reality really brings us back full circle, doesn't it? Back to the internal choice, the philosophical move towards acceptance. How do we actually build that robust personal reality? And this is where embracing paradox and mortality.
Yeah, the first step really is facing the inescapable self. The sources argue that one of the deepest human tragedies comes from conforming too much to external expectations, living solely according to the persona, that social mask we create to manage how others see us.
The mask we think protects us from chaos, but it ends up creating a kind of internal emptiness instead.
Precisely. There's that incredibly common regret people express at the end of life, documented time and again. It's usually not about money or career failures. It's, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me.
Wow.
When those social masks inevitably crumble near death because they don't serve a social purpose anymore, what's often left behind is just a void. A reflection of the potential, the unlived life that never got expressed because the person was too identified with seeking external approval, with maintaining the mask.
Which connects straight back to our core metaphor. If death is meant to be welcomed as an old friend, you kind of need to have cultivated an authentic friendship with yourself first. Otherwise, there's nothing really there when the mask finally drops.
Absolutely. Accepting mortality, seeing it not as some distant enemy, but as a constant, essential part of being alive right now. That's what creates the urgency to cultivate the authentic self now. You can't wait until the end to face the void. You have to build your own solid ground, your personal reality, before that old friend inevitably arrives.
And this is where the archetype of the fool becomes necessary, right? The figure we often dismiss as just silly or ignorant actually holds profound truth.
Yeah, the word itself is revealing. Fool comes from the Latin phallus, which means bellows, like the kind you use to pump air into a fire. The fool's job is to inflate us, to breathe life and air into the often sterile, overly rigid structures of our too serious lives.
So the fool challenges our seriousness.
Right. The fool acts as a catalyst for catharsis, for transformation, precisely because they challenge the one-sidedness we tend to fall into.
Because being too conscious, too analytical, too serious all the time, that's presented as a kind of illness in itself.
Exactly. Think of Dostoevsky's Underground Man, paralyzed by excessive self-analysis, drowning in self-loathing. The modern world often encourages that kind of paralyzing self-consciousness. The fool, in contrast, grounds us in the earthy side of life. It's interesting, the Latin word humus means earth, and it's the root of both human and humility. The fool doesn't sit around pondering the meaning of life abstractly. The fool just lives it with gusto. Maybe without the same level of shame or self-consciousness.
And this acceptance of life's difficulties, maybe through a kind of playful absurdity, shows up in the sad clown paradox.
Yeah, that phenomenon where people who are brilliant at making others laugh often hide deep inner pain, depression, or trauma. It shows humor functioning as this incredibly powerful defense mechanism. Nietzsche even suggested that maybe humans are the only animals who laugh because we're the only ones who suffer so intensely that we had to invent laughter as a way to cope.
The unhappiest animal is the most cheerful.
Paradoxically, yes. Cheerfulness becomes a kind of compensation for profound suffering.
The story of the trickster, Till Eulenspiegel, captured this beautifully too. His joy and his tears came from the same place, anticipation and reframing.
Right. He'd be laughing and joyous while struggling uphill, purely because he was anticipating the fun of rolling back down. And then, coasting downhill easily, he'd start weeping, anticipating the hard climb back up again. Laughter, in that sense, transcends the suffering, not by ignoring it, but by seeing it, anticipating it, and reframing it within the whole cycle of existence.
Yeah.
The fool's job is always to challenge one-sidedness, to show us that tragedy and comedy are always tangled together.
And the ultimate symbol of this fool's wisdom, this integration of all the opposites, chaos and order, creation and destruction, is the Hindu deity Nataraja, Shiva as the lord of the dance.
Nataraja is such a profound image. It's a visual representation of paradox itself. You see Shiva in this wild, dynamic, cosmic dance representing motion, energy, even destruction. Yet his face is depicted as perfectly serene, embodying absolute stillness right in the midst of the chaos.
And the symbols he holds.
In one hand, he holds the drum that beats out the rhythm of creation, the universe coming into being. In the other hand, he holds the fire of destruction, the end of things. He literally embodies the idea that life is this constant process of being created and destroyed simultaneously in one infinite rhythmic dance.
That image really forces us to differentiate between paradox and simple contradiction.
Yes, contradiction just stops things cold. It's barren, destructive, paralyzing. But paradox. Paradox is described as the vital water of life. It's fertile, creative. The big leap in consciousness is learning to see the constant play of opposites, joy and sorrow, order and chaos, success and failure, not as problems to be solved, but as the natural, necessary rhythm of life itself.
Nothing lasts forever, good or bad. The wheel always turns.
Exactly. And the fool is the one who accepts the turning of the wheel, maybe even finds joy in the ride itself.
And this acceptance, this conscious embrace of paradox, is what allows the, let's say, awakened mind to fully participate in the game of life.
Right. The fool sees that all our social structures, career ladders, political battles, social hierarchies, are, in essence, games. Complex games, maybe, but games nonetheless. And that's why the fool often laughs when people take these games too seriously. They understand the crucial difference between the rules of the game and the underlying reality beyond the game.
And the sources mention the core paradox of the game itself.
Yeah, the first rule of any social game is deceptively simple. This game is serious. If you don't take it seriously, then it's not a game. Society pushes back hard against any suggestion that what we're all doing might not be absolutely, ultimately serious.
Try telling someone their corporate ambition or their political cause is just a game.
Exactly. The system resists that perspective violently. But the awakened mind, the mind operating with the fool's wisdom, understands that the world is a kind of play, an illusion, Maya, in the Hindu tradition. But instead of trying to escape the illusion entirely, the fool plays along. They participate fully, consciously aware of the game's arbitrary rules, but without being crushed by its perceived gravity.
So they engage fully in the drama, they accept the chaos, the ups and downs, while holding on to that deeper truth, that failure, that end of things, the old friend, is not just inevitable, but actually necessary for growth, for transformation. The more desperately you cling to the mask, the more rigidly you play the game as if it's the only reality. Well, maybe the louder the cosmic laughter when the final curtain eventually falls.
So, okay, wrapping this all up, what does it really mean for us right now? We've journeyed through these deep internal struggles, the shame, the addiction risks, the chaos traps some minds fall into. And we've looked at the external forces trying to fragment us, things like variety attenuation, weaponized narratives, hyperstition.
And it seems like both battles, the internal and the external, really boil down to the same core challenge: managing complexity and resisting fragmentation.
Exactly. And the wisdom of the fool emerges as this essential guide. It shows us how cultivating high internal variety helps us resist that external simplification. And it shows us the power of pivoting away from fear and avoidance, that emotion-focused coping, towards consciously reframing our perceptions.
Cognitive reframing as the master skill.
Yes. And all of this brings us back powerfully to our central theme, that radical acceptance of the inevitable. The fool's wisdom fundamentally reframes failure, chaos, even mortality itself. It takes the enemy and transforms it into the necessary, constant presence of the old friend.
And accepting that old friend is really the only way to live authentically.
It seems to be the path that allows for genuine self-mastery, for developing the internal complexity we need to actually thrive, instead of just surviving by wearing a persona and constantly reacting to external pressures.
The choice sounds simple, but living it requires that daily commitment. Embrace the paradox, accept the old friend, and start maybe living that unlived life right now.
And just to leave you with one final thought to chew on, We talked about how collective memories, even the false ones born from hyperstition, seem to have that surprisingly short shelf life, maybe 10 to 11 days of peak influence before they really start to decay rapidly. So, if the consensus reality we all swim in is that fragile, if it follows a predictable mathematical decay, what obligation does that maybe place on you this week to actively cultivate and commit to your own robust, self-defined personal reality? One rooted in your authentic self and your consciously reframed perceptions, knowing just how temporary and fragile the shared illusion might actually be.